Well, I just got discharged. I'm currently paralyzed, but I did promise y'all a vid once I got out of the hospital, so here's the next part. We will be doing the same rules as normal. If it hits 10 likes within a week, then I make another vid quickly. If not, then it's gonna be a when I feel like it kinda thing. Before we start this video, I noticed that we are close to 200 subs. If you can get me there, I'll add another series into the mix. Chad panted as he fought to recover from the recent onslaught of attacks. In front of him, his orange-haired best friend was breathing somewhat heavier as well, though not as much as Chad. They had been sparring for the past 2 hours, with Ichigo fighting with his bare fists while Chad utilized his recently unlocked powers. It was the 3rd week of June and Ichigo had wasted no time in getting Chad to train with his new powers. It was an added bonus that sparring with Chad gave him some measure of diversity, since he had only previously ever sparred with Zangetsu. After finally catching his breath, Chad walked over to sit beside Ichigo on the soft grass located on top of Ichigo's private hill. Once more, he took the time to look around him, marveling at the perfect setup of Ichigo's chosen training location. The first time that he had been shown the place, Ichigo had explained how his first sensei, the person who had taught him Tai Chi and hand-to-hand combat, had revealed the clearing to him, mentioning that he, the sensei, would be leaving for a long time and it would be a waste if no one put it to good use. Chad absently wondered where the man was, considering that he had played such a vital role in shaping Ichigo into the person he was today. He realized that he wouldn't mind meeting the man sometime in the future. Still, his thoughts turned to the happenings of the past few days, and with some remnants of his amusement from days ago, he recalled the incident with the mod soul, Khan. Apparently, Kuchiki Rukia, in an effort to reduce Ichigo's dependency on her spirit glove whenever he needed to leave his body, as well as to prevent the attention garnered by his soulless body left lying about, had gone to some supernatural shopkeeper and purchased a mod soul dispenser. From what Ichigo had explained, mod souls were artificial souls created by the Soul Society for situations where a Shinigami had to leave his Gigai, but without arousing the suspicion of the humans around. The souls came in the form of small spherical candies, which were swallowed, thus ejecting the Shinigami in soul form from the Gigai, and replacing him with an artificial soul that would then go on to act like him for the duration that he was away. However, things had not gone according to plan. As Ichigo had explained, one of the mod souls, and coincidentally, the first one he had tried, had actually been a specialized combat soul created by the Soul Society for the purpose of being inserted into dead humans who would then fight alongside Shinigami. Fortunately, or unfortunately as the case may be, Soul Society had recognized the project as inhumane and moved to terminate it, as well as all artificial souls created for said project. The mod soul in question had managed to escape and, after a period of time, had then found himself inside Ichigo's body. As soon as Ichigo had gotten far enough away, the soul had decided that since the cat was away, it was time to play. Unfortunately for Ichigo, not only had the mod soul been a combat soul that was meant to have been destroyed, and was thus reasonably bitter and jaded, it was also something of a pervert, a masochistic pervert at that. Well, fortunately for Ichigo, and his reputation, Chad had been paying attention to the mod soul, and had therefore been on hand to intervene before anything untoward could occur. Still, the soul had managed to give him the slip during lunch break, and had taken off at a speed that Chad had been unable to match at the time. Still, Chad had later heard that the mod soul, Khan, had managed to save the lives of a few truant children by holding off a hollow long enough for Ichigo to arrive and purify it. Ichigo had then gone on to intervene when the shopkeeper showed up, wanting to take back the mod soul and destroy it. Last he heard, Khan was now inhabiting the body of a lion doll, and spending most of his days being dressed up by Yuzu after Ichigo had appointed him the primary job of taking care of his sisters whenever he was in Ichigo's body. What Chad, of course, could not have known about was the discussion Khan had had with Ichigo a few days after being adopted into the Kurosaki household. Ichigo suppressed another twitch as he once more felt the eyes of the lion doll on his body. He spared a moment to wonder why Khan had been staring at him for the past hour that he had been doing his school work. He had assumed that they had both reached an understanding when Ichigo had told him in no uncertain terms, with his blood-chilling glowing blue glare in place, that whenever he was inside Ichigo's body, his main priority would be the safety of his sisters. He had also warned Khan off using his body to perv out on the females in the vicinity, causing the mod soul to sulk for a while. He had finally placated the irate soul by promising to purchase adult manga and novels for him, on the condition that he kept them where no one would discover them. Khan had been noticeably happy after that, and Ichigo could have sworn, though the lion doll would deny it, that he had caught the mod soul drooling at the thought of the literary materials. Finally fed up with the continued staring, he turned a slightly annoyed questioning stare on the now sheepish mod soul. Khan hesitated for a moment before visibly steeling himself and replying to the unspoken question. "There's something off with your body." Ichigo's face abruptly blanked at his words, causing him to falter slightly. Still, he gathered himself and forged on. "When my kind was made, we were created with the ability to augment the base physical abilities of whichever body we inhabited at the time. For me in particular, my specialty was leg strength, running fast, jumping high, and kicking powerfully. But your body, your human body was already strong, too strong and too fast, stronger than I could have made any normal body." Khan could not have known that his words had reminded Ichigo of something he had read in one of the books his dad had given him. The passage had been on the topic of Zanpakuto spirits and the nameless Zanpakuto, called Asachi. For some reason he could not fathom, the passage had bothered him, so much that even Zangetsu had picked up on his unease. Since he had been unable to put into words what bothered him, they had both agreed to ignore it until he was able to make sense of it. For a long moment, Ichigo had just silently looked at Khan, before he had turned back to his books with only 2 quiet words. "I know." And that had been that. In the present, Chad shook off his distracted thoughts and, refocusing on the matter at hand, prepared to move on to the next set of exercises with Ichigo, playing tag. He turned to face the now standing Ichigo and gave a nod to show that he was ready. Suddenly, Ichigo blurred from his position, traveling at such high speeds that his form was almost indistinguishable to the naked eye. The first day that they had begun his speed training, Chad had been unable to even follow Ichigo's high speed, but now, his eyes managed to track him enough that he avoided the first tap, feeling the wind rush by in the wake of the fast-moving teen. He spun around to prepare for the next move and gathered his ryutsu as he had been practicing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As soon as he noticed a flicker in the corner of his eye, he spun and unleashed the gathered ryutsu, creating a huge blue torrent of energy, which missed Ichigo by a reasonable margin. Not one to be deterred, Chad unleashed the same attack, again, and again, and again, each time getting closer and closer to nailing the orange-haired teen as his eyes adapted to be able to track Ichigo's speed. On and on, they continued, with Chad continually attempting to hit Ichigo while also avoiding getting tagged in turn. A few minutes into the exercise, Chad had been forced to start moving as well, though nowhere near the speed of Ichigo's shunpo, he was still significantly faster than he had been before. Finally, almost an hour after beginning the chase, and 3 hours after the start of everything, Chad was just about ready to drop, all his energy having been spent. Still, he was determined to make one last bid for success. Stumbling forward as though he were completely spent, he dropped to one knee and panted, all the while keeping his senses on full alert for Ichigo to exploit his apparent weakness. Right on cue, he felt a rapidly approaching body from his left, and after timing it just right, he surged to his feet and swung his armored right hand, intending to snatch Ichigo out of the air. It was like the whole world slowed down. Chad's eyes widened as he noticed that Ichigo had apparently expected his trap, judging from the fact that the teen was currently hanging upside down, having just flipped as he approached Chad. Chad could do nothing as his fist sailed harmlessly below Ichigo, whose right pointer finger came up to gently poke Chad's forehead in a parody of a kill shot. Abruptly, everything sped up again and Chad found himself stumbling for real after failing to connect the powerful blow that he had just launched. Once he regained his footing, he turned to find Ichigo looking back at him with a faint smile on his face. It was only then that he fully allowed himself to relax, crumbling in place to end up seated on the soft grass. They were done for the day. As was usually the case, Ichigo and Chad spent the next few minutes discussing Chad's performance and pointing out areas of improvement, mainly in the areas of utilizing his Ryutsu to bolster his speed. Once they were done with that bit, Chad reclined fully as he waited for his severely depleted stores of Ryutsu to regenerate. In the meantime, Ichigo assumed his usual pose for Jinzen and smoothly transitioned from the outside world into his inner world. Suddenly, he was ducking and rolling away from a powerful slash as Zangetsu attacked in a flurry of black and silver. With but a thought, his own fully released blade was in his right hand and on a path to intercept another attack. He was no longer fazed by such an assault since Zangetsu had taken to surprising Ichigo like this in an effort to keep him on his toes and to hone his instincts and situational awareness. Back and forth, they danced in a shower of sparks to the tune of lethal blades singing through the air and metal clanging off metal. At the 1 hour mark, they began to trade Kido attacks as well, introducing variety into their battle. It all drew to an end 2.5 hours later when Ichigo stumbled in fatigue, the toll of fighting with Chad for hours, and then with Zangetsu for even more finally showing up. It was enough of an opening for Zangetsu to disarm him and freeze him with his sword's tip at Ichigo's throat. With a pleased nod of approval, Zangetsu stepped back and offered his now free hand to his prone wielder. Ichigo accepted the boost into an upwards position and settled down on the roof of the building they had been fighting on. The two males took the time to catch their breath and recover from their trying bout. Even Zangetsu found himself out of breath and a little scuffed up, a testament to his wielder's exponentially growing skill. Ichigo, for his part, was lost in thought, caught in a flow of memories from years past. He let loose a soul-weary sigh as he thought to himself. It's the time of the year again. Tomorrow was the anniversary of his mother's death. Zangetsu cast his gaze on the teen sitting at the edge, just beside his standing form, easily picking up on the storm of his thoughts. His eyes traveled heavenwards as he spied the formation of a scant few number of clouds. Wordlessly, he dropped his left hand onto the orange locks by his side and remained silent when he felt the teen tense up beside him, as well as when said teen then relaxed against his legs, taking comfort from his ever-steady presence. He merely let loose a pleased hum as the clouds all vanished completely, leaving only a cool breeze and bright sun in their wake. Together, the two companions silently observed the serenity of Ichigo's inner world, basking in the peace and calm that permeated Zangetsu's domain. Yuzu bustled around the kitchen as she put the finishing touches on the picnic meals that she and the rest of her family would be enjoying soon. As her body moved through the long-since memorized motions of preparing the meal, her mind began to wander into memories of times past. She had been very young, too young, when their mother had been ripped away from their family. Most of what she could remember was the ache of eyes being forced to produce more tears than they could handle, the feelings of loss as she had to come to terms with the fact that there would no longer be that soft and warm body to catch her as she ran forward for a hug, and above all, the soul-deep fear as she wondered if her sister would be taken from her too, her brother, her father. Some scant few days into their family's mourning, she had looked up at the overcast skies and thought, with a sudden viciousness that was so unlike her. Good, the sun shouldn't be shining on anyone anymore. As she had felt Karen startle beside her, she had realized that she must have spoken that thought out loud. She remembered that she had ignored Karen's shocked look, eyes unable to turn away from the heavens which shed the tears that she was unable to. And then, on one of the days when she had taken to staring out at a gray world as the rain beat a relentless rhythm, she had felt hands, strong and gentle, and warm, encircle her and hold her tight. At first, she had been surprised, having not expected the hug. Then, to her further surprise, she had felt the wall of shock that had blocked off her pain, crack and crumble before the tide of her grief. It was there, in the embrace of her big brother, that she had finally broken down and wept for the mother that would never smile at her, never hold her and tell her it would be all right. She had cried so hard that when she was done, she had ended up with a headache and sore eyes. Yet, through her pain, her beloved older brother had been there, waiting for both her and Karen when they woke up, and tucking them into bed when they went to sleep. It had taken weeks, but eventually, Yuzu had found herself able to laugh again, able to smile, able to live. Her healing had been further bolstered when Ichigo had begun allowing her perform little things in the kitchen as he went about learning to cook for the rest of the family, as well as clean up after them and generally take care of both herself and Karen. Now, years later, whenever she prepared a meal, no matter who it was for, she did it for the brother who had put her world back together when it had been broken apart that rainy night years ago. Ichigo dropped into a squat as he gently put Yuzu down, having carried her the rest of the way to their mother's grave. Instinctively, he held out his hands to both of his sisters, choosing not to comment on how fast Karen was to grasp his offered hand. Together, with Isshin following close behind, the Kurosaki siblings moved forwards to kneel at Masaki's gravestone to begin their yearly family ritual. As always, Yuzu was the one to go first, then Karen, then Ichigo, and finally, Isshin. One by one, they all told Masaki about the important things that had happened to them in the past year. While they spoke, Yuzu passed out sandwiches and drinks to the others as Isshin spread out the mat by the grave. The family was lucky that the weather of the day was unusually clear and bright. For what felt like hours, the Kurosaki family shared their lives with their departed but ever-present mother, basking in the feelings of togetherness that their yearly ritual always inspired. Once they were done, Ichigo left his sisters with Isshin, knowing that Yuzu and Karen would spend the time changing the flowers by their mother's grave, a sort of sister bonding thing, while Isshin would keep watch over them. He picked up one of the remaining sandwiches and a drink, and made his way to a clearing not far from where he was. Rukia startled as she suddenly heard someone coming to a stop a few feet from her. Slowly, while admonishing herself for getting caught off guard, she turned to find Ichigo holding out a sandwich and a bottle in her direction with a raised eyebrow. Accepting the offerings with a grateful nod, she made way for him on the bench she was seated on. As she worked on opening her meal, Ichigo spoke, causing her to tense momentarily. "I see that your powers have still not returned." Noticing her still from the corner of his eyes, Ichigo continued. "In fact, if anything, they seem to be diminishing even more." As he finished speaking, he turned to find Rukia frozen with a slightly pale face and widened eyes. Noticing that he was looking at her, Rukia knew that she really ought not to bother with lying, and so, she gave a jerky nod. Ichigo let loose a weary sigh and asked, "Do you have any idea why that might be the case?" Slightly relaxing as her fears of Ichigo reacting badly to the apparent extension of his substitute duties were proven unfounded, Rukia turned her attention towards providing an answer to his question. Finally, she responded with, "I can't say for sure. All I can think of is that my absence from a Ryutsu-rich environment like Soul Society is to blame." Ichigo, however, noticed that even as she spoke, her doubt was clearly audible. With a nod at her response, since it was the most logical one so far, he prepared to ask her another question when a scream pierced through the air. By the time Rukia had understood what she had just heard, Ichigo was halfway across the clearing, feet practically not touching the ground as he blazed a trail straight back to his sisters. He slid to a stop at the top of the stairs leading down to where he had left his family. In the blink of an eye, he took in the scene. His dad was passed out against a demolished headstone, and Karen and Yuzu suspended in the grasp of a relatively large and powerful hollow. Rukia came upon scene in time to witness a black-clad Ichigo deliver a stunning double stomp to the face of the hollow, while a normal-clad Ichigo caught the suddenly dropped Kurosaki twins. A few moments was all it took for her to realize that Ichigo had swallowed Khan's pill, having taken to carrying it around in small dispenser whenever he intended to leave the house with both his sisters. Immediately, Khan was diving backwards, effortlessly clearing the distance in a display of superhuman agility, to land beside Rukia. With a jerk of his head, he passed an unconscious Karen to her and spun in time to catch an airborne Ishin tossed by Ichigo. All of that took a scant few seconds. Still feeling off balance by the recent fast-paced events, Rukia turned back to Ichigo just to watch him grab the hollow by one of its trailing tendons and leap away, clearly intending to take the battle away from them. Khan, just finally relaxing from the last stressful seconds, flinched as Rukia gasped beside him, her faintly spoken words only just reaching him. That was the Grand Fissure. The hollow known as Grand Fissure stumbled back to his feet from the small crater that had been made when the Shinigami had slammed him into the ground. Finally regaining his bearings, he cast his gaze around the new clearing he found himself in, looking for the brat who had dared to manhandle him. Once his eyes landed on the orange-haired figure, he took an unconscious step back at the look in the person's eyes. Ichigo was barely breathing as he observed the hollow standing before him. Though his body was there, his mind was lost in memories of 6 years past. There was no way he would have failed to recognize the figure before him. At the edge of his perception, he heard hurried footsteps approaching the clearing, instinctively stretching out his senses to confirm that they belonged to Rukia. Not letting his attention stray, he spoke up, voice empty of anything but the sound carrying it. You're the hollow from 6 years ago. Grand Fissure tilted his head in curiosity, wondering at what the kid before him meant. Putting his words from his mind, he prepared to taunt the Shinigami when his voice died before leaving his throat as he finally tasted, the Ryutsu being released by his opponent. His eyes widened in glee as he spoke. Ho, I remember now, you're that brat from the river. Normally, I don't bother to remember guys, but the woman who was with you was particularly tasty. At that last bit, Ichigo stilled completely, not even seeming to breathe, a fact which the hollow picked up on. I wonder, was she your sister? No, I know, your mother. Completely focused on the person before him, Grand Fissure did not even pick up on the muted gasp from the bushes at the edge of the clearing. Rukia had a hand over her mouth as she stared with saddened eyes at the motionless form of her orange-haired friend. During one of the many times they hung out together, Ichigo had told her about his mother and about the fact that she had been killed 6 years ago. He had not said it at the time, but she had gotten the feeling that Ichigo suspected what the cause of death had been. Now, she watched as the thing that had destroyed the center of Ichigo's world taunted him. Ichigo, whose head had been down with his hair shadowing his eyes, raised his gaze to lock with the black and yellow eyes of the monster before him. In the face of Ichigo's look, Grand Fissure found his mocking smile slowly dimming until he was left staring back at the orange-haired Shinigami's blank gaze. Suddenly, the clearing erupted in a furious storm of powerful Ryutsu, and Grand Fissure, a hollow responsible for the death of numerous Shinigamis, seated officers amongst them, found himself choking on the amount of fury that saturated the very air. So powerful was the Ryutsu that the air seemed to distort around Ichigo's form as the intensity of his Ryutsu warped the region around him. In the bushes, Rukia struggled to remain in place as the full weight of Ichigo's power bore down on her shoulders. Just when she thought that she would falter, a hand landed on her shoulder, causing her to flinch in shock and turn to the newcomer. Her face paled as she took in the Shihakusho-clad male beside her, until she noticed that he was countering Ichigo's Ryutsu. Deciding to focus on the pressing issue at hand, she turned her eyes back on the battle in time to witness Ichigo's opening salvo. With a boom, the ground Ichigo was standing on cratered under the force of his push-off. Vanishing from view for a second, Ichigo appeared beside Grand Fissure with his sword already in a completed swing. Grand Fissure only had time to blink before his left arm went sailing across the clearing, leaving a bloody stump in its wake. With a howl of pain and rage, he threw himself back away from his attacker, working to suppress the pain of his suddenly removed limb and regenerate it. Ichigo dispassionately watched the hollow as it retreated from him. His rage had gone beyond volcanic and had crystallized into a cold and focused fury which left his mind unburdened and his goal crystal clear. The hollow would die, after suffering first. With a surge of malicious Ryutsu, Grand Fisher regrew the missing limb and flexed it to reassure himself that it was still there. Turning his now seething gaze on the still blank Ichigo, he snarled out. So you managed to wound me. Don't get cocky, you little shit. I've been eating Shinigami more powerful than you since before you were born. With that last statement shouted out, his Ryutsu exploded around him as he launched a barrage of sharp-tipped tentacles at Ichigo. The attack punched through the air where Ichigo's torso had been seconds before as Ichigo executed a smooth twirl around the assault. With the tentacles now right of him, his sword flashed through the air once, effortless cleaving through the barrage of tentacles and leaving Grand Fisher once more howling in pain. Still, Ichigo was not done. His left hand lashed out to grab one of the retreating tentacles, and as Grand Fisher's eyes widened in fear, he yanked on it with Ryutsu-infused strength. Helplessly, the hollow sailed through the air towards the Shinigami, but in the instant before he reached him, his hair suddenly puffed up and lashed out. Ichigo rolled forward under the airborne hollow, consequently avoiding the spiked hair surging towards him. He came up out of his roll in a standing position facing the place where Grand Fisher had just crashed into. Grand Fisher choked on blood as the cut Ichigo had made while he rolled under him bled profusely. With a heave of effort, he staggered back to his feet in the cloud of dust kicked up by his impact with the ground. For the first time in 54 years, he found himself at risk of losing a battle with a Shinigami. He wondered how he could turn the tide and reclaim victory, before he suddenly perked up as an idea came to him, causing his face to break out in a truly malicious smile. Rukia felt the surprise coming off the Shinigami crouching next to her, and found that she could hardly blame him. Grand Fisher was a hollow well known by the Soul Society to be a foe beyond the ken of most Shinigami, some of whom were seated officers themselves. And yet, here was a human teen who had been a Shinigami for a mere month going toe-to-toe with the hollow and coming out on top. She quickly refocused on the battle as the cloud of dust cleared up, and she found herself muffling another gasp. As the cloud slowly cleared, the first thing that came into view was the smug grin on the pale mask of the hollow before him. Before he could wonder at the cause for the smile, the reason revealed itself. Standing in front of the hollow, facing towards Ichigo, was the serenely smiling form of Masaki Kurosaki. The beautiful vision before him hit like a punch to the gut. He stumbled back in shock as Masaki took a step forward, hand outstretched, lovingly beckoning him in death as she had in life. The storm of Ryutsu that had been raging around the teen flickered and then promptly died out as the image before him further damaged his already unstable mentality caused by being forced to face the thing that had killed his mother. Grand Fisher's smile widened even further as he saw the effect the dead woman had on his foe. He took a hesitant step forward, gauging the teen's reaction, and promptly had to fight down a delighted cackle when the teen failed to react to his move. He shifted his stance in preparation to bring their match to a bloody and satisfying close, completely ignorant of what was happening within Ichigo. Ichigo felt a rising miasma of cloying grief, debilitating rage, and paralyzing fear clawing its way up his throat. He knew that he was mere moments away from losing it and throwing everything away without thinking. Just as he felt the last of his self-control snap, he found himself rapidly blinking as his eyes sought to adapt to the sudden brightness of the day. His gaze trailed upwards to take in the turbulent clouds in the sky of his inner world. He felt a hand rest on his shoulder but resisted turning to face his older companion. He did not want to see the disappointment that must be on Zangetsu's face at his falling into despair. He felt as Zangetsu let loose an exasperated sigh before he shifted. Ichigo sucked in startled breath as gentle and strong arms came up to wrap him in a comforting hug. He choked on air as he fought, and failed, to keep in the fury of emotions threatening to overwhelm him, and through it all, was Zangetsu's unwavering comfort. Slowly, after an eternal minute, the tide of grief, pain, loss, anger faded, leaving Ichigo completely spent and yet surprisingly lighthearted. With a faint nudge from his older companion, and a deep breath on his part, he felt his consciousness fade out from his inner world and opened his eyes to find the Grand Fisher leering back at him. Not a second had passed. From the depths of his soul, he felt a warm and soothing wave washing over him and Zanjutsu's voice saying, "Look upon the sight before you, Ichigo. Look beyond the surface and tell me what you really see." Ichigo's eyes slowly rose, taking in the beautiful face, loving smile, bright orange hair, and then finally meeting her eyes. Their eyes held for the space of a heartbeat, before Ichigo exhaled and slumped in 1 part realization and 3 parts relief. That was not his mother. No matter how perfect Grand Fisher's mimicry of his mother's visage was, he had failed to mirror the most defining trait of a living Kurosaki Masaki, the love her eyes always held when looking on one of her own. Though the smile aimed at him was his mother's, the empty gaze, devoid of soul and emotion, was the pathetic imitation of a being that could not even begin to grasp the emotion that was love. With that realization, Ichigo felt himself calm as the weight of having to fight what he thought to be his mother fell off his shoulders. He straightened and fixed the hollow before him with a look that caused it still in its subtle advance. From her crouched position in the bushes, Rukia watched with no small amount of confusion as Ichigo seemed to freeze for an instant as he was faced with the visage of his late mother, before all the tension abruptly left his body when his eyes met the woman's. She observed as he straightened in place and gathered his strength around him as he seemingly caught his second wind. She leaned forward as she began to pick up a faint increase in Ryutsu from Ichigo, though not yet up to the level it had been before. She felt herself stiffen as Ichigo's voice softly traveled through the clearing, stilling the air with lethality of a cold blade held to one's throat. "You are the most despicable type of trash that exists, an abomination in a world already filled with its own brand of monsters." Grand Fisher's eyes flashed with maddened rage at the audacity of the child before him. His voice, when he responded, reflected the insanity that lurked in his black and yellow eyes. "You, how dare you try to judge me? Right now, you intend to continue fighting me, don't you? Then doesn't that mean that you are going to harm your mother again, huh? How can you call me a monster when you already plan to, Burke?" Grand Fisher's tirade abruptly cut off in a muted snarl of pain as Ichigo twisted the blade currently plunged into his gut. In retaliation, the hollow lashed out with a powerful punch only to freeze as Ichigo effortlessly caught it in his left hand. Looking into the Ryutsu blue eyes of his opponent, Grand Fisher began to understand that he had bitten off more than he could chew. With merely a tensing of his muscles as warning, Ichigo clenched the arm in his grasp in preparation to rip it off when he felt a gentle touch on his face. Grand Fisher, who had begun to doubt the wisdom of engaging the teen, regained his confidence as he noticed Ichigo's pause. Not wasting any time, he manipulated the lure into speaking, hoping to create an opening he could exploit. In a gentle tone, the clone of Kurosaki Masaki said, "Ichigo, enough, you can stop fighting now. You couldn't save me then, and you can't save me now." As Rukia heard the woman's damaging words, she made an aborted motion, as though to go to Ichigo, when she felt a hand grip her arm, holding her in place. Turning back to the scene unfolding before her, she prepared to shout out as she took in Grand Fisher's shifting in anticipation of an opening in Ichigo's defenses, an opening that was almost certain to exist after what the woman had just said. She should have learned by now not to assume she knew what Ichigo would do. Grand Fisher, expecting the kid to wince or something, was taken aback and a little afraid as he watched a small smile break out on the Shinigami's face. His confusion was replaced by the realization that he had probably just made his last mistake as Ichigo spoke. "If I was still unsure about you, that would have settled it for me." Slowly, following some instinct he couldn't even begin to understand, his left hand released the hollow's fist and rose to gently touch the cheek of the woman before him, mirroring her own position. With a slight smile on his face as he spoke, he watched the other woman closely, taking in the way her own smile fell off her face to be replaced by a panicked look before the two fell away. "There is no way that the real Masaki would blame me for her death. You are not my mother." Rukia twitched as she felt a sharp pulse of Ryutsu spreading from Ichigo's hand and she heard her surprised inhale echoed by the person beside her as they all watched the features of the orange-haired woman distort and then fall away to reveal a blank and featureless life-sized doll. Grand Fisher screamed in rage at being thwarted, but before he could react, the blade still sticking in him was suddenly ripped out, causing him to stumble at the renewed pain. Just as he began to frantically shunt Ryutsu towards his grievous wound, it became a moot point. The sound of a blade singing through the air preceded the crack of bone succumbing to a superior force, and once that sound had settled, Rukia felt her mouth open in disbelief. Ichigo's broad katana was sticking out of Grand Fisher's forehead, with the teen himself suspended in a handstand with his right hand on the sword's handle. Then with a roar of effort, he brought his feet crashing down onto the edge of the sword sticking out of the mask, forcefully driving it down and through the hollow, finally cleaving him in two. With a sound like a click, the bisected body of the hollow formerly known as Grand Fisher fell into two parts in a spray of blood and gore, impacting the ground with a dull thud. Ichigo, back turned to the rapidly dissolving spirit particles of the corpse behind him, turned his head to the sky as he felt a soothing peace spreading through his soul, feeling but not paying heed to the single tear drop that trailed a lonely path down his right cheek. Seating beside his wife's grave, Kurosaki Ishin tensed for an instant as he held the sleeping forms of his twin daughters in his hands, before his head bowed as he felt the Ryutsu of the hollow vanish from his still weak senses. In his arms, the two sisters stirred to wakefulness at the same time as they felt a few tears impacting their head. As one, they slowly moved forward and enfolded their father in a hug, not knowing the reason for his tears, but doing all they could to show him their love for him. In the loving embrace of his girls, Kurosaki Ishin finally let his guilt and regret flow out in the form of tears, leaving the peace and contentment of his late wife's love. She was finally free. Kuchiki Rukia stared out at the overcast skies from Ichigo's window. The teen in question was currently in the process of tucking his sisters into bed, leaving her with that little window of solitude. With a fond smile on her face, she reminisced on all the memories she had created with the surprising orange-haired teen. Truly, Ichigo was a rare individual. She let loose a slight chuckle as she recalled how she and his sisters had teased him using Don Kananji's truly obnoxious signature pose and laughter. Ironically, the media sensation had actually encountered a real live hollow, or what was about to be one anyway, during his show, but luckily, Ichigo had wasted no time in performing Kansu on the bound soul before it could fully devolve into a monster, even if he had been forced to gently nudge Kananji out of the way. A snort escaped her as she recalled the spectators' reactions to the sight of Kananji sailing through the air from some unseen force. Instead of running away like normal people, they had surged forward in heightened interest. Truly, humans were a curious sort. Still, it wasn't all pleasant memories of the past month. The encounter with the investigating Shinigami on the anniversary of Kurosaki Masaki's death still left Rukia feeling dry-mouthed. It didn't help matters that the scout had witnessed Ichigo slay a hollow that had plagued Soul Society for over half a century. Nonetheless, the Shinigami had been unusually sympathetic, leaving her with a comment that had inspired some little hope in her, despite the grim situation she had found herself in. Kuchiki-san, you know how the higher-ups feel about what you did with your powers. Furthermore, you know I have no choice but to report it. Even though this was just a routine checkup mission, I will have to put it in my report, but you know how the captains are with their paperwork, it will take weeks before they get round to reviewing such a low-priority report. With those parting words, and a small mischievous smile in her direction, the Shinigami had vanished through a Senkaimon, headed for Soul Society. Though the man had been kind enough, they had both known that he had only been delaying the inevitable. They would come for her, and when they did, she only hoped, and she knew by now that it was futile, that Ichigo would be kept apart from the whole mess. The opening of the door behind her shook her out of her thoughts, and as she spun to face the entering teen, she hurried to wipe her previous thoughts from her face. The narrowing of his eyes let her know she had failed. Ichigo paused in the doorway as he took in the barely hidden traces of anxiety on his friend's face before he fully entered his room and shut the door behind him with a sigh. Making his way to his bed, he plopped down and turned his serious hazel gaze on her, simply asking, "How long?" Rukia flinched, before hastily moving to reassure him that she had everything in hand. already knowing that she would only be wasting her time as she tried to deny his suspicions. WHWH, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong. I can handle it. Ichigo merely let her finish her hurried response before fixing her with an expectant look and waiting. She broke first. She sighed resignedly and sunk into the seat facing Ichigo's bed. Closing her eyes, she spoke softly. At the most, a month, from the day with Grand Fisher. Ichigo's eyes slid shut at her words, while his mind began furiously working to find ways to. Don't get involved with this, Ichigo. Startled, his eyes snapped open and locked onto Rukia's suddenly blazing violet orbs. A determined gleam entered his own furious eyes, which easily matched hers in sheer obstinacy. In his gaze, Rukia read his determination to be there for her when it all came crashing down, and perhaps for the first time, she understood what Orihime had been trying to tell her a few weeks ago. I could learn that the world is ending tomorrow and I wouldn't be afraid, because I would know that Ichigo would be there. She gave a weary sort of sigh, and said, I know that you want to help me, but you would be helping me more if you tried to stay away when they finally come for me. Ichigo clenched his jaw, and gritted out. And when they come for you, what are they going to do? Silently looking at the teen before her, she considered, for one fleeting moment, she considered lying, but then, she gave him the truth. What I did, so many nights ago, is considered treason. Ichigo froze as he felt the very air in his lungs still. Then, without any warning whatsoever, he surged to his feet in a towering rage, oblivious to Rukia's flinch at the sudden motion. Furiously, he paced across the room, working to contain the sudden bout of anger he was feeling, determined not to let his Ryutsu leak and disturb his sleeping sisters. When he was finally assured that he had some measure of control over himself, he ground out in a tone dripping with lethal intent. They would kill you for doing your job, for saving lives. Instead of answering, Rukia merely turned her gaze outside, which was answer enough. Abruptly, Ichigo slumped in place as all the wind fled his sails, leaving him feeling empty. However, before he could join Rukia in feeling hopeless, he felt a gentle wave of warmth and support from his soul, and he suddenly drew up, gathering his determination around him once more, and causing Rukia to look at him with something other than the helpless sorrow previously in her eyes. Fixing her with a look, Ichigo was unaware of the fact that his eyes had begun to glow blue as he vowed. If you think that I will stand aside while some uptight, delusional little pissant tries to execute you for doing something that they wouldn't do, then you have another thing coming. And somehow, despite knowing that Ichigo couldn't possibly hope to stand against the entire might of Soul Society, she found herself unable to deny the faint feelings of hope kindling in her soul. The opening of the only door to the room failed to draw the bespectacled gaze of the room's sole occupant from the reports before him. Speaking in his customary charming tone, he inquired, are there any new developments? With an obscenely vulpine grin on his face, Ichimaru Jin spoke to his brown-haired boss. Yeah, actually, apparently, Grand Fisher bit off more than he could chew. Now raising his eyes from the droll reports, he focused on his subordinate with an interested smile on his face. Jin barely suppressed the shiver that threatened to crawl up his spine at being the subject of the other captain's gaze. In a casual tone, Sosuke Aizen inquired. And, why are we just learning of this? Feeling his grin freeze on his face, Jin was proud of the fact that his voice still came out sounding normal. No idea, I just learned it from some loud member of the 2nd Division. For some reason, it has just recently become common knowledge. Though, I have no idea why the cameras didn't catch it. Letting out a contemplative hum, Aizen finally smiled as his mind came up with a possible explanation. More amused than anything else, he turned back to face Jin, feeling the ominously gentle smile on his face widen as his accomplice took an involuntary step back. He is growing better than I expected, much, much better. In the shadow of the tall building next to him, the stranger felt his captured prey wiggle in his hand. Clenching his fist, His ears picked up the crackling of the object as it was crushed by his superhuman strength. Letting his fist unclench, his sharp gray eyes followed the smashed remnants of the reconnaissance device. With his task done, he spun and vanished from the alley he had stood in, the flutter of his white and green jacket, and the click-clack of his wooden sandals, the only proof that he had been there moments before. Ichigo, Chad, and Rukia made their way towards Karakura Middle School to watch Karen's soccer match. Chad had accepted Ichigo's invitation to hand out with him and Rukia, while Orihime waited with Tatsuki, who had karate practice that day. Earlier that day, the results of their exams had been posted and the majority of his class had once more been stunned by Ichigo's performance. Somehow, no matter how they looked at it, they just couldn't wrap their heads around someone like him coming in at third place in their year, just behind Orihime and Ishida Uryu. Keigo had wasted no time in bemoaning that fact, an issue further aggravated by Chad's similarly impressive position of 10th place. As was par for the course, he had been summarily ignored. Now, as the three classmates made their way to their destination, Ichigo and Chad shared a slightly amused look, before abruptly drawing to a halt, startling Rukia, who overshot them. Before she could express her indignation at the sudden stop, Ichigo spoke into the empty air before him, tone unmistakably amused. "Is there something I can help you with, Ishida-san?" Whirling as she picked up soft footsteps, Rukia's eyes landed on a slim bespectacled brunette, absently noting that he was in the same class as them. Ishida Uryu's slender hand came up to adjust his perpetually slipping glasses, resulting in an ominous flash of reflected light off of them. With a slightly haughty and contemptuous tone that hid his surprise at being found out, he responded. "I'm surprised you sensed me, Shinigami." Neither Ichigo nor Chad, who had turned to face the newcomer, visibly reacted to his words, though their eyes gained hardened glints in them. Rukia, on the other hand, couldn't keep herself from tensing at Ishida's words, her surprise at his knowledge of Ichigo's identity visible. Continuing on before any of the three could respond, he said. "Though, perhaps I shouldn't be too surprised, considering how much better you have gotten at keeping your Ryutsu under control over the years." Ichigo merely raised an eyebrow as he interpreted that to mean that Ishida had been sensing him for years now, given that his Ryutsu output a while back had been unregulated. Deciding to finally contribute to the discussion, Ichigo replied. "That still doesn't answer my question. Is there something I can help you with, Ishida-san?" For a moment, Ishida was quiet, leading the three friends to believe that he would fail to respond, before he spoke softly in answer to Ichigo's question. "You know, of all the beings in this world, there is none more despicable than a Shinigami." At the focused hatred in his voice, Chad and Rukia shifted in caution, both wondering if the teen was about to do something drastic. Ignoring the tensing of the two beside him, Ichigo simply met the burning gaze of the brunette before him, remaining silent in the face of Ishida's hateful words. Suddenly, Ishida tilted his head to the side, as though listening to a faraway sound, before he smoothly raised his left hand and spun to the right, while spreading his legs in a perfectly balanced archer's stance. Just as Rukia was about to question his action, her eyes were drawn to the gleaming silver cross on the teen's wrist as it tinkled like a small bell. Before anything else could be said, all three classmates twitched as a crackling bow made of blue reishi, spirit particles, suddenly erupted into existence in Ishida's left hand. Gracefully drawing the bow, a matching blue arrow flashed into existence, before it was released, sailing through the air with the effortless ease of a hot knife slicing through butter. Following the trajectory of the projectile with their eyes, Chad, Ichigo, and Rukia watched as it pierced the head of a hollow that had suddenly materialized some distance away. Hearing the sound of the bow being dismissed, they turned back to watching Ishida, and it was Rukia who was the first to react to recent events, disbelief evident in her voice. You must be a Quincy." Smirking softly at the Shinigami, he responded in a sardonic tone. "Correct, Shinigami Kuchiki Rukia. I am a Quincy, a mortal enemy of the Shinigami." At that, his hands swiftly came back up with his suddenly materialized bow in them, an arrow knocked and steadily trained on Ichigo's chest. Chad made as though to move forward, but a slight gesture from Ichigo had him subsiding, though he did clench his fist in preparation to intervene at a moment's notice. Instead of reacting defensively to Ishida's blatant threat, Ichigo said, "You know, that is all very interesting, yet, you still haven't told me what you want with me." Conscious of, yet choosing to ignore, Rukia's confused look at him seemingly being obtuse, Ichigo patiently waited for Ishida to answer him. Taking a moment to consider the perplexing orange-haired teen before him, Ishida found himself slowly dropping his hand and dismissing his bow. Still unsure of Ichigo's unexpected reactions, he wondered if there was something wrong with the teen that he would fail to react to someone pointing a bow at him. Ichigo continued to wait for Ishida to respond as he contemplated the teen before him. Before he had learned to be perceptive and observant, he would have simply reacted brashly to Ishida's blatant threat and moved to clash with him. Now, however, he had seen and interpreted the look of anger, hurt, pain, and loss in the other teen's eyes, and going on some instinct, which Zangetsu also approved of, he was trying to see if he could reach out to boy who was hurting just as he had once been hurting. Finally deciding to dismiss his reservations, Ishida took a single step forward and, reaching into his pocket to bring out a trinket, spoke to the others. "Why don't we have a duel, you and I? I'll show you just how superfluous Shinigami really are." Rukia's startled gasp had Ichigo aiming a questioning look at her. With a noticeably surprised voice, she said, "That's a hollow bait." With his eyes sharpening at her response, and his quick mind making the appropriate deductions, he slowly asked, "And, just what do you plan to do with that?" With a superior smirk on his face, Ishida replied, "I will crush this and lure a number of hollows here. The one who kills the most within 24 hours wins." Ichigo was silent as his penetrating gaze rested on the teen in front of him, before he slightly shook his head with a soft chuckle, and a faint feeling of disappointment, and promptly turned away from Ishida, while tossing over his shoulder, "Thanks, but no thanks." With a look of anger on his face at being so callously dismissed, Ishida stepped forward and snarled, "Are you such a coward that you are unable to lift a finger without Kuchiki Rukia's permission?" Seeing Ichigo freeze in his departure, Ishida allowed his smirk to reappear on his face, before it was abruptly wiped off by Ichigo's words. "Actually, it just occurred to me that if you are willing to endanger this town, and all the innocents in it, over something like your pride, then you are lower than the Shinigami you so despise." His piece said, Ichigo continued walking away, once more joined by a stoic Chad and a hesitant Rukia. Behind them, Ishida Uryu remained frozen as Ichigo's words penetrated his mind, sparking off a rage the likes of which he hadn't felt since he had watched his grandfather die due to the failings of the Shinigami. Up ahead, the three teens stopped as they felt the storm of angry Ryutsu rising behind them. With a resigned sigh, and somehow knowing what was about to happen, Ichigo turned to face the now blank-faced Ishida just in time to watch him crush the bait he held in his hand. Instantly, his senses went haywire with the emergence of a significant number of hollows into the air around them. Not hesitating for a moment, his hand plunged into his pocket to retrieve the dispenser that he had begun using to transport Khan outside the house. Swallowing the pill, Ichigo immediately began speaking to Chad, Rukia, and Khan. "We have to make sure that we protect as many people as possible." Getting a determined nod from them, with Rukia somewhat bewildered by Chad's tacit agreement, Ichigo continued, "Khan, you what to do?" With merely a nod in response, the mod soul was off in a blur, racing towards the soccer field that Ichigo's sisters would be on. Satisfied that his sisters would be taken care of, Ichigo prepared to send Chad to their own school to see to Tatsuki, Orihime, and whoever else might still be there, before he suddenly paled in horror as he recalled that Yuzu would not be on the field yet, since it was her turn to clean up their homemaking class. Torn in his decision, and unwilling to send Rukia out to face hollows in her condition, Ichigo said, "Yuzu is still in the school." Immediately, Chad grasped his dilemma, and he too floundered for a second, before Rukia intervened. Before any of the two teens could react, she peeled off, headed for their school while shouting back. Chad, you go, I'll get Orihime-chan and Tatsuki-chan. Momentarily, Ichigo locked gazes with her and she looked how he imagined he must have looked the night before as she failed to convince him to stay out of the coming mess. With an exasperated huff, he nodded at Chad, who immediately took off for Karakura Middle School to back up Khan and protect Yuzu. With the most vulnerable locations in the town taken care of, for some reason, Hollows always went for kids first. Ichigo prepared to move out as well. In the few seconds that it had taken the three to mobilize, Ishida had merely stood there staring at them as they bustled to their positions. Suddenly feeling eyes on him, he looked up, only to take an unconscious step back at the look of rage in the orange-haired teen's eyes. When Ichigo spoke, Ishida could swear that the air between them vibrated with the force of his fury. When this is over, me and you are going to have a talk. And then, with the bespectacled teen watching on, Ichigo vanished from sight with a whisper of sound and a flutter of black and silver, leaving the four hollows that had been sneaking up on them to fall to the ground, all rapidly dissolving as their heads rolled to a stop. Rukia panted as the last of the controlled teens crumpled to the ground in unconsciousness. Turning her gaze to the side, she found a slightly bruised Orihime and similarly exhausted Tatsuki. She had managed to get to the school in time to help the two girls avoid getting hit by attacks launched from the hollow that looked like a chandelier. The unconscious teens, Chizuru amongst them, had not been so lucky, thus forcing the three girls to knock them out as they were being forced to attack them. The hollow known as the numb chandelier gazed at the three humans below it, two of whom could actually see it, suggesting a tasty bounty about to be had. It was amused as it watched them catch their breaths after knocking out its puppets, somehow thinking that that was all it took to thwart it. It let loose a chuckle which drew their attention, before it twitched a limb, causing them to pale as the teens lying around them slowly began to get back to their feet. Letting out a maliciously entertained chuckle, the hollow drew the attentions of the teens and spoke. While I must agree that it was amusing to watch you struggle, I'm afraid that I've grown tired of this. Now, time to die. Tatsuki, Rukia, and Orihime all put up quite a fight, but the toll of their injuries so far was too much, and before long, all three were subdued. Tatsuki struggled to toss off the teens that were holding her down, but given that she had had an intense training session that afternoon, she was completely spent. Rukia couldn't even dredge up a sliver of ryutsu to resist her opponents. She was completely spent and at their mercy. Orihime, though valiantly putting to good use the various moves Tatsuki had taught her, lacked the stamina and tenacity that the other two girls possessed. Together, all three girls lay under a pile of controlled students, much too tired to put up any struggle whatsoever. Numb Chandelier cast a satisfied gaze onto the finally subdued teens, practically drooling at the upcoming feast. Deciding to twist the knife further, having learned that feelings like grief, rage, and sorrow added flavor to devoured souls, it spoke. You know, I think that I shall have two of you kill each other while the third one watches, Orihime, following its gaze to Rukia and Tatsuki frantically struggled to get away from the arms pinning her, causing her captive to land a painful blow on the back of her head, forcing her face into the concrete of the roof and leaving her dazed. Tatsuki, seeing what had happened, let loose an involuntary cry of alarm. Orihime. Chuckling to itself, the hollow drew a bead on the two brunettes and prepared to fire off headshots. A few miles away, Ichigo whirled in alarm as he faintly picked up Tatsuki's alarmed voice. Casting his senses out, he cursed as he felt Rukia, Tatsuki, Orihime, as well as many other students facing a moderately powerful hollow which was gathering its ryutsu for something. Just as he prepared to dash off, he found himself surrounded by a horde of hollows numbering at least 20. Narrowing his eyes in anger, he worried that he might not make it in time. Ishida Uryu gritted his teeth as he fired off powerful arrow after powerful arrow at the hollows attacking him, studiously ignoring the numerous cuts that now marred his fingers from the continued strain of keeping up the uninterrupted salvo. He was feeling faint regret at his rash actions from earlier as he saw people fleeing from some of the collateral damage being wrought by their actions. Absently, he realized that the bait should not have attracted quite as many hollows, nor hollows of such caliber. Then, all such thoughts fled his mind as he picked up on a faint voice screaming a name he knew well. Orihime. Though they had never really had much of a conversation between them, she always seemed to have a kind, if nonsensical, word to share with him whenever they did run into each other. It was one thing to look at strangers caught in the crossfire of his hatred and feel vague pity, it was then another to see a classmate in danger and know that he and his pride were the cause of it. Wasting no time, he immediately began using his not yet mastered Harenkyaku, God step, pushing his already strained body to get to the school in time to save his classmates. Orihime watched with tears in her eyes as Tatsuki was repeatedly stomped on in retaliation for her attempt to react to the blow dealt to Orihime. Turning her head to the side, she felt her blood freeze as she saw Rukia's still form with her eyes closed. Struggling, she reached out her hand and just barely managed to grasp Rukia's wrist, finally letting herself breathe as she felt a faint flutter denoting her friend's pulse. Noticing the sudden lack of blows from her other side, she turned and failed to suppress a low sound of despair as she watched Tatsuki also succumb to her wounds and fall unconscious. Turning back to the cackling monster, she watched as it seemed to aim at her two friends, and in a flash of cold terror, she realized that it was sighting their foreheads. Clenching her eyes shut, she prayed for a miracle. Someone, help us. And in the depths of the brunette's soul, something stirred from its century-long slumber. The entity felt its own weakened state and knew that it could not bring to bear its godly powers in the situation. Just as it prepared to return to rest, it sensed a flutter of power a distance away, a soul, with such immeasurable potential that the entity would be in awe were it capable of such higher thought processes. Reaching out, it grasped a tiny portion of the being's soul, which also had a vague feel of its host's own energy, and thoughtlessly ripped off the tiny piece, much too little for its loss to harm the soul. It considered the soul sliver it held, well, as much as a non-living entity could be said to consider, and realized that it would not be enough. Unless, as the solution came it was already implementing it. Marshalling its reality-redefining powers, it rapidly matured the soul piece in its possession, forcing it to realize the vast potential that it had possessed, leaving it access to immeasurable, transcendent, power. Finally, just before it prepared to return to its state of slumber, the entity set about satisfying its primary objective, fulfilling the will of the one that had stirred it awake. As it sensed its workings taking root, it incorporated what was left of the power it had borrowed and finally slipped back into its state of rest as traces of black and red intermixed with its mixture of blue and white energy. If it were capable of such feelings, it would have felt pleased with the strength of the will of the one who had awoken it, a will to defy reality itself. Then with an untraceable flicker of odd ryetsu, the Haugyoku was still once more. As numb chandelier finished gathering its energy, it prepared to launch its missiles, just as an eruption of golden ryetsu tossed away a majority of its minions, freeing the girls held underneath. Flinching in shock, it involuntarily let loose its projectiles, vaguely noting that its aim was still on target. Rising effortlessly, as a wellspring of power flowed into her, Inoue Orihime peripherally took in a few facts. First, all her injuries were healed, and she felt better than she had since the fiasco had begun. Second, she noticed a black-clad Ichigo materializing at the edge of the roof, seemingly stumbling as he came into view, as well as a broad katana sailing towards the monster that had attacked them. Third, Ishida Uryu seemed to have also arrived at the same time as Ichigo, though he came bearing a glowing blue bow in his hand. Fourth, two green spikes were racing towards her friends, aiming to pierce them in their foreheads. Fifth and final, her arms were rising of their own volition with her palms facing the monster before her. A second before the missiles reached his classmates, Ichigo struggled to regain his balance after the muted spike of pain that he had felt all the way in the depths of his soul. As he watched his sword skewer the hollow in its face, he knew that it had been too late to halt its attack. He was also in no position to intercept the attack about to hit Rukia and Tatsuki. Ishida's arrow pierced the hollow a heartbeat after Ichigo's sword did. Even as he tried to manipulate the spirit particles around him, he knew that his body was too strained to protect his classmates as the attack neared them. With the spikes inches from their position, Orihime's voice cut through the despairing silence, speaking words that seemed to flow forth from the depths of her soul. Santen Keshen, I reject. Ishida and Ichigo gaped as a glowing gold shield sprang up in front of the three girls, easily deflecting the two projectiles aimed at them. Still moving on autopilot, Orihime then dropped her hand, causing the shield to disperse, and said, Soden Kishen, Twin Sacred Return Shield. A huge gold oval sprung up around Tatsuki and Rukia, and before the startled eyes of the three observing teens, the wounds on the two girls healed up, leaving them unmarred and healthy. Before either Ichigo or Ishida could react to the recent events, Orihime dropped in a dead faint, scaring the crap out of her classmates. As Ichigo slid to a stop beside her, he frantically checked her for injuries, only allowing himself to relax once he certified that she was merely resting. Hearing footsteps approaching, he raised his eyes to lock with the hesitant gaze of Ishida Uryu, easily reading the remorse and guilt in the eyes staring back at him. Just as he prepared to speak to the other teen, they both turned as they heard slow applause coming from off to the side. Slowly stepping forwards, with the click-clack of his sandals preceding him, Urahara Kazuki revealed himself to the teens before him. As he felt Tessai, Jinta, and Ururu step up beside him, he began to speak in his disarmingly cheerful tone. Ma, Kurosaki-san, don't worry about those three, they are just. Abruptly, his words cut off as a curtain of potent ryutsu descended on the entire town. Eyes widened in visible surprise and no small amount of disbelief, Kazuki turned his gaze upwards, causing the others to follow his lead, just in time to witness a crack appear in the fabric of space high above the town. While the others gaped in stunned silence as the air was rent apart to reveal an endless swirl of darkness, Kazuki lowered his head in thought, his quick mind easily deducing the cause for the presence of the new foe. Standing from his crouched position, Ichigo made his way towards Kisuke's group, as did Ishida. Absently, his right hand reached to his side and caught his suddenly approaching sword, too distracted to notice the reactions of those around him at the act. Together, the gathered people watched as a towering giant hollow, clad in a long-nosed white mask and flowing black robes, stepped through the portal into their world, bringing with it a vast horde of airborne hollows. Ichigo gripped his sword tightly as his eyes narrowed at the new arrivals making their way towards the town. Just as they all prepared to leap into battle, a gasp from behind drew their attention to a pale and shaking Kuchiki Rukia. Following her gaze, they looked up to find two other cracks in the sky, which were rapidly opening, and in each of their depths, a hint of a huge long-nosed white mask.